let's talk about some horror books. I'm still trying to play catch up in reviewing all the books I read over the 6 months that I wasn't filming, so today we're reviewing the books I read in the horror genre. The first book I have to talk about is Ben Heavens by Daniel Kraus. I do own this book, but it's over there and I'm lazy. This book is from the perspective of a teenage girl whose father used to be kind of the town crazy because he was very obsessed with aliens. He believes that he was once abducted by aliens, and ever since then, he has been trying to catch the aliens that once abducted him. When the book starts, the father has once again gone missing. She's trying to move on with her life, but her best friend wants to keep searching for these aliens in the same way that the dad used to. I really enjoyed this book. I do not think it was subtle in any way about the messages it was trying to deliver. It had a lot to say about immigration, and of course when you use aliens to represent that sort of idea, it's not subtle. It's hitting you over the head with this message. But I enjoyed what it did. It was a very ugly book, a very violent book. It talked a lot about the way we treat people that we don't quite understand, people who aren't from here. Like I said, not subtle in any way. I also enjoyed the kind of messed up friendship between the main character and this friend of hers who is helping her with these traps that they're setting for the aliens. It was very clear that she didn't necessarily want to be friends with them anymore, but I do think that can ring true because I do think a lot of the times, especially in small towns, you end up with these friends that like you've known forever. So it doesn't really come down to whether or not you want to be friends, you just are. I've heard a lot of people say they don't like the main character. Her grief rang really true to me. As someone who went through a bout of grief in high school, I feel like I very much connected to this character. She didn't necessarily make a lot of her own decisions. She kind of went with whatever her friend wanted to do, but I think that that's what happens when you're grieving so deeply is you're kind of walking through life in a fog, and so you are just doing whatever someone tells you to do. I will say the one thing I didn't care about in this book was the love interest, because in YA I just never give a crap about the love stories unless that's what the book is actually about, and even then, still not my thing. But overall, I just really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, but it might be a 5-star book. I just have a hard time giving anything 5 stars. The next book I want to talk about is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This book, as well as Ben Heavens, were both on my top 10 of the year list, so clearly I love them. The Only Good Indians is about a group of men who once did something that they shouldn't have done and are now being haunted by some sort of entity connected to that event. This book takes turns kind of throughout each of these men's lives and their possible downfalls. I really enjoyed everything about this book. I read this during the summer and I just kept wanting to read more and more. It was very propulsive. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the cultural aspects of this. I really enjoyed the entity itself because, like, I'm not really into paranormal horror, but this type of paranormal horror where it's an entity that has possibly some sort of spiritual connection, I loved that. This worked so well for me because it had so much to say about guilt and so much to say about, like I said, like their community and culture and being tied to something even once you've tried to let go of it. I really just loved this book overall. It was so unique from any other horror I've ever read, and I'll definitely be picking up more from Stephen Graham Jones. And since we're talking about Stephen Graham Jones, I might as well mention Night of the Mannequins, which I also read from him. This book was about a group of friends in high school who decide to play some sort of prank on another friend, except that that prank possibly goes awry and may or may not have set a mannequin on destructing their town. Stephen Graham Jones really kills it with the unique horror ideas. This one I didn't like as much as The Only Good Indians, but I still really enjoyed it, and it was, like I said, very unique. I felt like the main character's voice rang so authentic as a teenager. I sometimes found myself annoyed by the character, but it felt very true to how a teenager would think and speak. I enjoyed being in this character's mindset and seeing his thoughts kind of devolve and just see how he was being led down this path. I don't want to say too much and give anything away, so I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and if you're at all interested, I would definitely pick it up. I don't think you'll regret it, even if it's not like a standout favorite. Another arc that I read was Whiteland by Rosie, Cranie, Higgs. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy this one. It started off really strong, but got more of a slog throughout. This book is about a family who is on vacation in the Swiss Alps, I think. I can't remember where they are, but they're on vacation somewhere. The book starts off with one of the daughters suddenly seeming possessed by something and injuring herself. From there, the main character, who is another of the daughters, the sister of this character who just injured herself, goes on a quest to figure out what the hell is going on and what might possibly be possessing her sister. She meets up with a local guy who decides to help her on her quest, and that all happens within like the first couple chapters. It really starts off quick. From there, they find out that there's this other place called Whiteland that they can only enter through the forest. And that's where things start to get incredibly boring. Because while they keep talking up this Whiteland place and how dangerous it could be for them to go there, it never fails to deliver on that danger. Instead, you just spend a lot of time walking through Whiteland. And honestly, it just doesn't lead anywhere. Near the end, they kind of talk about the lore behind this place, because I believe it is actually connected to some sort of real life myth or some sort of lore. And I wish that had taken place more throughout the story, and that we had learned some of that more at the halfway point instead of right near the end, because there was just so much nothing. There was just this huge chapter of them going in and out of Whiteland, them debating whether they were doing the right thing, and it felt like at a certain point you didn't know what they were doing, what they were trying to do, where they were going, and it just became really, really irritating. I gave this 2.5 stars, but honestly, it probably deserved a 1 star, and that hurts to say because I'm pretty sure this is the debut author. The next thing I read was Rolling in the Deep by Mira. This is a prequel to Drowning in the Deep, I think, which was a mermaid horror story I read last year, and unfortunately I didn't really enjoy that, but I enjoyed the idea of it enough to want to read the prequel. In that book is about the younger sister of a girl who had gone missing on this ocean voyage for mermaids. And in this book, in this prequel, you get to see that voyage with the older sister who went missing. You obviously knew how this was going to end because it's the prequel to a book I already read, but I enjoyed it fine. It wasn't anything exciting. It was quick. It was scary. But if you've already read the first book, then you pretty much know what's going to happen. You know how it's going to happen because we've already seen these mermaids. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I honestly don't even remember it really that well. I mostly just remember the first book. Another thing I read this year was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. I read this with Kaylee over at Dog-Eared Page. This book is about a group of writers who get invited to this old haunted house for some sort of online experience from this like media mogul. In this haunted house, 2 women have died back in the day or something, and they might possibly be haunting it. I don't know. This book is another book that started off really strong, but I unfortunately couldn't hold that momentum for me. It wasn't a bad book by any means. I know a ton of people love this one, and I wish I loved it as much as everyone else. I really enjoyed some of the characters. In fact, I'd say I enjoyed pretty much all the characters. They were all very interesting. Each writer, had a very different, distinct personality. None of them fell too hard into cliche, which I really appreciate. And I was intrigued to see where the story was going. Unfortunately, the ending just didn't satisfy me. It really felt like it was building up to something, and it just never quite got there. I just wanted a higher level of horror. It certainly wasn't a bad read. If you're at all interested, I would pick it up. It's definitely one of the better horror books I've read, which just shows how many crappy horror books I've read. but I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I just wish it was a little bit better. Another thing I read was Ring Shout by Djeli Clark. This is kind of a historical fantasy horror novella that was, once again, unlike anything I've ever read before. This had to do with the Ku Klux Klan and the 3 women who are fighting them off. But in this book, the Ku Kluxes are actual literal monsters. The way that the author describes these monsters is, once again, just so unique and so evocative. There's a lot to say about spirituality and heritage and that connection to your ancestors and the power that it can give you. There's also a lot to say about hate and the sort of force that that can be. Watching Lovecraft Country back in the same time that I was reading this book, and they remind me so much of each other. I felt like this book could be an episode of that show. I enjoyed the writing of this so much. I kept wanting to underline certain passages that just felt so powerful. I also really enjoyed the characters, though I do wish that we got a little bit more time with them in the beginning before all the shit hit the fan. Overall, I just really enjoyed this book, and I just think it's something I'm going to remember for a long time, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Another horror novella I read was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. This was quite a trip. This was about a couple who has been dating for a little bit, and they're on their way to meet his parents. I'm not even sure what I can say about this book. Luckily, I feel like most of BookTube has read this before. I read this all in one night, I believe, and I enjoyed my reading of it. It was a trippy sort of stream of consciousness excursion, but I feel like I'm not even sure how to rate it because I kind of feel like there's 2 separate ways that you can read the ending, and one of those ways I love so much, and the other way I hate with every fiber of my being. So I don't really know how to rate this because I'm choosing in my mind, and I chose on Goodreads, to believe that it's the ending that I like. Because if so, it's an ending that I've never seen before, whereas the other ending is something I see all the goddamn time and I'm just over it. And it's very much a cheap gimmick, whereas the other thing I think is quite profound. So I'm sticking with the good way of thinking. If you don't like stream of consciousness, you're not gonna like this. If you don't like things that are hard to understand and more philosophical than literal, then you're not gonna like this. There's not much you can say about the story or the characters or anything else. It's really more about mood and atmosphere, and it's more of an experience. It feels like you read it to say you've read it, but it's not necessarily something that I can say is the best book I've ever read or anything, but I'm glad that I read it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And the last book I have to talk about here is The Remaking by Mcleod Chapman. So if you've seen my worst books of the year list, you know that this was number 1. I did not love this. It, once again, started off strong, which I don't understand. Why is this a running theme that horror books start off strong and get worse as they go? I feel like it should be the opposite. Have you ever seen The Exorcist? The first part is real boring, and then as it goes on, it gets intense and amazing. Like, that's what I want. Why is this so hard to give me? Anyways, The Remaking is about the making of a horror film that goes on to have an accident on set where somebody dies. They then remake that movie with a similar outcome, and then they remake that movie again. This movie is all based on an urban legend about a mother and daughter who died. The urban legend, loved it. It was right at the beginning, and it was so dark and pretty gruesome, and I thought right away that this was a good sign for what was to come in the book. I was very wrong. It sucked. It never got darker than that first chapter. It has a lot of the book follows around this child actress who is starring in this film. The first part is following her around while she's a child. The second part is following her around while she's an adult, filming the remaking of this movie that she was in as a child. I enjoyed her as a character. I enjoyed her perspective. Unfortunately, it never went anywhere, which was just my overall problem with this book, is they kept building and building the anticipation for something big to happen, and then they would just skip that part and go to the next section of the book, which you can't just skip the horror parts in the horror book. I don't know what to say about that. It was just so frustrating, and then the same thing happened with the third part. It felt like it was building up to some huge death scene, and it just never got there. So I would skip this one. I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. Those are some of the horror books I read in 2020 in lockdown. I hope you liked this video, and I hope you'll come back again soon. Bye.